Hello everyone. So this is Geog, and I'm going to do a different type of video where this video is going to be essentially a list of countries that are most similar to Jamaica, and I am using the website of objectivelists.com as a reference point. So it's going to be interesting to see which countries are the most similar to Jamaica, and obviously, looking at this list, it's clear that most, if not all of the countries are going to be Caribbean countries since they share similar landmass, temperature, cultural, population, and all that stuff, including history. Here is the rubric that is used to determine which countries are the most similar to it, and as you see here, there are 5 categories that we are going to get into based on the results here. So the first one is demographics, which is based off of ancestry, so the race and genetics, language, which is native languages, religion, so the religious background, the age, which references the average age, child population, and elderly population, education, which references the average education, literacy rate, college graduation rate, employment, so the average unemployment and occupation rate, income, obviously the average income, poverty rate, and millionaire rate. And the final one is anatomy. So this includes stuff like height, weight, gender, and circumcision, which that part's interesting, I guess. Second category that is used for this metric is culture. So when it comes to that, we are looking into language, which is self-explanatory already. Religion, which we already covered. Writing, so this involves official scripts. Behavior, so personalities and violence. Tradition, so stuff like holidays and marriage practices. Recreation, so team and Olympic sports. Food, which involves the types of food we eat, so stuff like meat, dairy, fruits, vegetables, and starches, and narcotics, which involves alcohol, drugs, and smoking. So the culture involves the society and the common activities that formulates the culture between a specific country or a specific set of countries. The third category is politics. So this involves the government and its adopted policies. So obviously the type of government, the methods of the election, authoritarianism and citizenship, enforcement looked into, so the rule of law, the legal system, and punishments. Cooperation, so this includes stuff like common courtesy, trade blocs, and defense alliances. Restrictions, so gun control, narcotic prohibition, and gambling laws. Prohibitions, so marriage regulations fits into this, obscenity laws, and reproductive rights. Entitlements, so this includes healthcare, education, welfare, pension, paid vacation, all that stuff. Requirements, so conscriptions, jury duty, compulsory education, mandatory voting, and tax obligation. And the final one in this grouping is movement. So citizenship rights, rights of abode, visa policy, and immigration policy. The next category involves infrastructure. So this mainly ties to technology and its typical use. So it's looking to the type of transportation that's used, the water, whether it's or how. When it comes to the water, this refers to the accessibility, its use, and the water source. Energy, so stuff like its use, the source of the energy, and the access of the electrical energy. Sanitation, so stuff like the water quality, sewage, and all that jazz. Electrification, so obviously this involves the electricity outlets, the voltage, and the frequency. Communication, so stuff like television, phones, and the internet. Medication, so obviously the infrastructure of doctors and hospitals is looked at. And the final element in this group is protection, so weapons and military sophistication is important. And the final category is the geography. So obviously this mainly focuses on the environment and the physical attributes of that country or the countries that are being compared. So the climate, obviously this involves temperature and precipitation, the vegetation, so stuff like biomass, or biomes, agriculture and floristic region. The land cover, so the forest land, agricultural land, shrub and barren lands. The location, so this is essentially the latitude and longitude. Landmass, which is the continent, tectonic plates, and hydrologic regions. Habitation, so this is the population density and built environment. Topography, elevation, and scope, that's what consists of it. And hydrology, so this is the inland water and coastal water. Just from looking at this, it seems like the highest points you could get in each category is 20, and with there being 5 categories, that'll add up to 100. So when we're doing these comparisons, the overall comparison score will be out of 100. Now let's get into the countries that are the most similar. At number one is the Bahamas. And honestly, this really isn't shocking to me just from my life and dealing with people of both groups and just general knowledge. I knew immediately that Bahamas was very similar to Jamaica, so it being number one here isn't really surprising. So out of a score of 100, my bad. Out of a score of 100, its total score reached 79.8, which is essentially 80%, and that means it has 4/5 similarities. So, based on this list, they have a very similar demographic, which really isn't shocking to me. Obviously, when it comes to the demographic, they mean unambiguous black people. They have similar population when it comes to age and all of that, and that's not shocking at all. And it's pretty much the same thing with the culture of Bahamas as well. I know a lot of them are Christians. They're both Anglo Caribbean countries, so they share the same holidays, they have the same customs, and all of that. And we see the similarities in the infrastructure as well, though it's nowhere near as similar when it comes to the demographics and the culture. And just from interacting with Bahamians, the demographics and culture being so similar really isn't surprising to me. There are a bit of differences when it comes to the government, though it's still at 15, and I'm not shocked that it's still relatively high up since a lot of the Anglo Caribbean countries have similar government and they went about independence in a very similar way. But we do have a major difference, and it's mainly in the geography, where the Bahamas has a lot less mountains compared to Jamaica, where Jamaica has a lot of coniferous forests and is seen as much more developed and much less dangerous in comparison. And it also isn't in the Caribbean tectonic plate, so it definitely explains some of the geographic differences as well. I'm also using another site for my information, and you see it in the top right here. It is worlddata.info. So as we scroll down, you see there's different categories. There's the general information, infrastructure, climate, population, energy balance, languages, quality of life, telecommunication, religions, economy, and healthcare system. So for the general information, obviously both are in the Caribbean. The area, when it comes to kilometers, is a bit bigger with Bahamas, so I think it's mainly due to it being several separate islands compared to Jamaica. They have a very similar government form as they're both parliamentary democracies under constitutional monarchy since they're both Commonwealth countries. When it comes to the population, Jamaica has a much bigger population than the Bahamas by a lot. The life expectancy rate is a bit higher in the Bahamas. The average age is 30 for both, but Jamaica is a bit higher, not much different. The birth rate and the death rate are pretty similar as well. So when it comes to the quality of life, just from looking at this, the Bahamas is definitely better than Jamaica by quite a bit, which is kind of sad, where Jamaica doesn't have good numbers at all, with the slight example of political stability, but even that isn't the greatest, where the Bahamas is a bit more consistent in that regard when it comes to the quality of life. Here's the information when it comes to the economy. The unemployment rate's higher in the Bahamas than it is in Jamaica. The inflation rate is higher in Jamaica. It seems like the cost of living in the Bahamas is higher. Um, the average income in the Bahamas is higher, and the central government debt is a bit similar but seems a bit more. And the corruption index is a lot higher in Jamaica than the Bahamas, where it's moderate for the Bahamas and outright bad in Jamaica. I'm not going to get into all that gross information, but if you want to look at it, here it is. And when it comes to the infrastructure, here is the information. There's a lot more to look at when it comes to Jamaica, and the passenger airport is higher in the Bahamas than it is for Jamaica. Here's the information when it comes to the energy balance. Jamaica in general just has a lot more compared to the Bahamas. Here's some telecommunication information where Jamaica has a lot more internet users, mobile cellulars, and all that jazz compared to the Bahamas. When it comes to the healthcare system, it does seem like the Bahamas is better as there are more hospital beds and physicians per 100 INH. The HIV rate's much higher in Jamaica than the Bahamas, and so is the diabetes rate. Though there's more smokers, or the smoking rate in Bahamas is a bit higher than Jamaica. So when it comes to the climate, they're relatively similar when it comes to the daytime temperatures, the nighttime temperatures, the water temperature, the humidity, rain, and the rain, essentially. Though Jamaica is a bit higher when it comes to the temperatures, though the Bahamas has a bit more humidity. When it comes to the native languages, obviously Jamaica has a high rate of an English Creole, which is Patois, and we call it a dialect. There's no information there when it comes to the Bahamas. So that's the native tongue, Patois in Jamaica, where it seems like English, French Creoles, and shockingly Haitian Creole, that's interesting, is a major language over there. And Jamaica has more other and Hindu, which isn't surprising at all. And then the last category we are looking into is Christianity, where both have heavy Christian populations, though the rate in Jamaica is 66% compared to Bahamas' 94%. Obviously, there's a bit of a Rastafarian population with Jamaica, and the others higher in Jamaica as well compared to the Bahamas. The silver prize of second place goes to Trinidad and Tobago, and this one really isn't shocking to me. I've met and I know a lot of Trinidadian people, and that's been the case throughout my entire life, and they've always had a lot of similarities to Jamaican people when it came to their food, their language, their culture, and they're both Anglo Caribbean countries and islands. So this really does make sense. So the overall score, based on the criteria that's set, is a 78 out of 100, and that's a very high score. So the demographic has a 15.5. This makes sense because I'm pretty sure there are a lot of black people in Trinidad and Jamaica, but obviously there's a higher percentage of Indian and Douglas population compared to Jamaica. So while that is the case, those groups do exist in Jamaica. It's nowhere near to the same amount as Trinidad and Tobago. The culture is also 16.1%. They both went through independence. They're both Commonwealth countries. They are Anglo Caribbean countries. Though, like I mentioned earlier, I think the Indian influence in Trinidad caused this number to be a bit lower. The government also at a 16.1. Both of them are Commonwealth democracy countries. That pretty much makes sense. The infrastructure is 14.5, and the geography is 16. So there's still a lot of similarities there, though. enough notable differences are placed here too. And that the food is very similar. Obviously, there's a lot of rice and peas, a lot of chicken, a lot of seafood, a lot of yams and potatoes and stuff like that, which definitely makes sense. And of course, there's slight Indian influence with both of them, though it's mainly just roti and curry for Jamaica, though Trinidad has a lot more of that. So now we are going into the world data.info country comparison between the two countries. So yet again, these are the 11 categories that are used here. So looking at the general information, Jamaica is much larger in area compared to Trinidad and Tobago, which the latter is two islands compared to just being one large island. The government form is a parliamentary democracy, which is under a constitutional monarchy, and Trinidad and Tobago is a parliamentary republic. So that's pretty interesting. There's a bit of a difference there. Obviously, both are a parliament, but I guess the functionality of them is different, and that might explain the score in the other post as well. When it comes to the population, Jamaica has a bit over twice as much of a population compared to Trinidad and Tobago, which really makes sense, though the inhabitants by kilometers are very similar to each of them. I guess that makes sense because Jamaica is twice as large as Trinidad in landmass and twice as large as Trinidad in population, so that pretty much makes sense. The life expectancy is a bit longer in Trinidad and Tobago compared to Jamaica, where the average man lives 2 years longer and the average woman lives 5 years longer in Trinidad in comparison. And the average age with each country is 30.9 with Jamaica and it's 38.5 in Trinidad. The birth rates are a bit larger in Jamaica, though it's not as high, and the death rate's also a bit larger in Jamaica compared to Trinidad as well. And the migration rate is a lot smaller in Jamaica compared to Trinidad, which is interesting to me. So now we are looking into the quality of life, and it just from immediately looking at it, Trinidad is a bit better, though I don't think it's as much of a wash compared to Bahamas. The political stability between the two countries is relatively the same, though Trinidad is slightly better. The civil right is the same, though Trinidad has it a bit worse than Jamaica. The health in Trinidad and Tobago is a lot better in Jamaica, where it's literally a third larger or third better compared to Jamaica. The climate is 66 in Jamaica, where it's 47 in Trinidad, so I guess it's a bit better in Jamaica. The cost of living is around the same between both of them. So Trinidad's slightly better, and the popularity is a bit better in no, the popularity, yeah, Trinidad has a higher popularity score when it comes to quality of life compared to Jamaica. So when it comes to the economy, the unemployment rate is relatively the same with both countries. The inflation rate is definitely higher in Jamaica. The cost of living is a bit higher in Jamaica than Trinidad, though it's roughly the same. The commercial taxes and contributions are higher in Trinidad. The average income is higher in Trinidad. The central government debt, or the GDP, is higher in Jamaica, and both of them have pretty bad corruption indexes, and they're pretty close together. And that's the gross information. And it seems like with all of them, sorry, all of them but imported goods, Trinidad is higher, though Jamaica is higher when it comes to the imported goods. That's the number for the infrastructure. The energy balance is higher in Trinidad all the way around. The telecommunication is a bit better in Jamaica than Trinidad, but it's not a stark difference between the two of them. Uh, the HIV rate's a lot higher in Jamaica than Trinidad. The diabetes is relatively the same, though Trinidad's a bit higher. The hospital beds per 1,000 INH is relatively the same. The physicians is a lot higher in Trinidad than Jamaica as well. And when it comes to the climate, they're very similar here. As you see, all of the percentages are and numbers are pretty close, with the exception of the rain days where there's more in Trinidad than Jamaica. And by looking at their maximum day temperatures, they're very similar. So the native languages, Jamaica has the English Creole of Patois that takes up 94%, where Trinidad and Tobago is normal I don't want to say normal English, that's a bad way. Formal English is 93% there. Both have a smaller Hindi language population, which makes sense based on the Indo indentured servitude base there, and Jamaica has a higher other percentage as well. So obviously, there's a much higher rate of Hinduism when it comes to religion in Trinidad and Tobago, which makes sense due to the Indian population and most of them being Hindu. And they have similar esque rates when it comes to Christianity, though non denominational. I wonder if, and then this number, 21.3%, the non denominational, that's interesting as well. At number three is Belize, and this one isn't that shocking to me, though I thought it would be a bit lower. So the total score is 73.2, so it's not at that three quarters mark, and that really isn't surprising at all. When it comes to the demo, it got a 13.6. This isn't that surprising to me since there was a lot of immigration to Belize from Jamaica over the last 100 years or so for a variety of reasons, and there is a decent black population in Belize. But there's also a growing mixed population in the country where it was a black majority country, but now that's not really the case. And obviously, it has a lot of influence within the Hispanic Central America culture. There is there's a decent amount of similarity since they're both Anglo countries, and obviously, with a lot of Jamaicans going to Belize, obviously, there's going to be some influence there. And religion is pretty similar as well. Kind of the same with the government. Obviously, the infrastructure and the geography isn't the most similar. When it comes to the geography, there is a lot of tropical elements to both of them, and I believe Belize is on the left of Jamaica, so it's not surprising that there's similarities when it comes to the temperature. But when it comes to the infrastructure and the land, it is different because Belize isn't an island, it's a part of Central America, so it have more in common with those areas. And I do think there's a slight Hispanic influence that makes Belize kind of stand out compared to Jamaica. Now we're going to use world data to compare Belize and Jamaica. So let's see what will show up. Okay, so we have the different qualifiers here, which I've gone over before. So when you look at the region, obviously there's a difference because Jamaica is considered to be a part of the Caribbean and Belize is considered to be a part of Central America region-wise. But we know when it comes to general talk, Belize is also considered to be a part of the Caribbean, though I think it's mainly due to them being Anglo countries more than anything else. So Belize is twice as big as Jamaica, which kind of makes sense because Belize isn't an island and Jamaica is. Both are run under parliamentary democracies under constitutional monarchy, so I guess their government's relatively similar. This is oh wow, I'm actually shocked. Belize has a much shorter population with 411,000, and Jamaica's at almost 3 million. The inhabitants per kilometer is a lot smaller with Belize compared to Jamaica, which definitely makes sense because Belize is twice as large as Jamaica with population, but when it comes to inhabitants, it's much less. The life expectancy for both of them when it comes to the men and women are relatively the same, so that's interesting. The average age of Belize is smaller than Jamaica, with the former being 26.8 and the latter being 30.9. The birth rates are higher in Belize. The death rate is higher in Jamaica, which, wow. And then when it comes to the quality of life, uh, they're kind of similar, really. Um, the political stability is relatively the same, though Jamaica's a bit higher. Jamaica's a bit higher in civil rights than Belize, and when it comes to health, Jamaica's a bit worse than Belize, but they're relatively the same. Jamaica's a lot hotter, or the quality of climate is a lot better in Jamaica than Belize, according to this. The cost of living is a lot better in Belize, and the popularity is relatively the same, though Belize is a bit higher. I'm wondering what metric they're using for that. So for the economy rates, the unemployment rate is higher in Belize, the inflation rate is higher in Jamaica, the cost of living is higher in Jamaica. The average income is higher in Belize, which is interesting. The central government tax higher in Jamaica. Oh wow. I knew Jamaica had bad corruption just based on the other comparisons, but apparently it's really, really, really bad in Belize. So maybe that's another similarity that they have. So there's the information on the infrastructure that you can look at. The energy balance, there's just generally a lot more energy in Jamaica than Belize, which definitely makes sense. And this will obviously relate over to the telecommunication being much higher in Jamaica than Belize as well. So when it comes to the energy and technology, Jamaica is a lot better and they're really not compared. Hospital beds per inhalation or whatever the INH stands for, higher in Jamaica, physicians higher in Belize, HIV rate a bit higher in Jamaica than Belize, tuberculosis a bit higher in Belize, though neither are high. Diabetes is a bit higher in Belize than Jamaica, and the smokers are relatively the same, though Jamaica's a bit higher. So, just by looking at the climate of the two countries, they're pretty much the same when it comes to the daytime temperatures and the nighttime temperatures. So, like I mentioned earlier, they're very similar when it comes to their climate and temperature. The water temperature is a bit higher in Belize than Jamaica. The humidity rate is a lot higher in Belize than Jamaica based on these results, and it rains more there too, though the sunshine hours per day is higher in Jamaica than Belize. When it comes to the native languages, and I think here is where you start to see some of the cultural differences. Um, Belize has a 32.9% English Creole. Obviously, Jamaica is 94%. Spanish has 46%, and it's almost half. And with this number, you would think that Belize is a part of Latin America, but it really just isn't. But it also just shows the mixed population linguistically wise as well. Interestingly enough, there are some Mayan languages, like it's formal English, Garifuna, German. So they're in much smaller populations, but it's more notable, where that's not really seen in Jamaica. And just by looking at the religion, both are heavily Christian countries, non-denominational. Jamaica's a bit higher. I need to look up and see what that actually is. Hold on. Does it say here? Okay, does it say there? And there's a bit of a Maya religion, which makes sense because Mayan languages shows up here. So I guess there's a small indigenous Mayan At fourth place is Guyana, and this one doesn't surprise me at all. I know a lot of Guyanese people. I've met a lot of Guyanese people throughout my entire life, and there's a lot of similarities between Guyana and Jamaica and the people. So I wasn't shocked that Guyana made it to the top five. When it comes to the demo, before the demo, it has a total score of 71.2, so less than three quarters. When it comes to the demo, it's at a 15.4. There is a lot of people of African descent in the group, and there's a lot of Black Guyanese people, but it's only at 15.4 because there's a much higher Indian population in Guyana. So it's similar to Trinidad in that regard, and there's only a minor Indian presence in Guyana. Sorry, in Jamaica compared to Guyana. When it comes to the culture of 14.9, this isn't shocking. Both of them are Anglo Caribbean countries with a lot of African influences, and there's slight Indian influences in Jamaica compared to Guyana. So this makes sense. The music is very similar. A lot of the food is kind of similar. So this isn't shocking. The government at a 14.1, I'm not shocked at this at all. And the infrastructure is 14.3 as well. I do think the Indian influence caused these scores to be a bit lower, but there's a huge difference with the geography, which is only at a 12.5. This isn't surprising at all, because apparently Guyana has a lot of forestry that takes up a lot of the land, where a lot of people in Guyana tend to live by the coast, where Jamaica is an island, so there's not a whole lot of forestry, and the temperature is just very, very different, and the landmass between the two is different, since Guyana is officially a part of South America. I also forgot to mention that they do drive on the left in Guyana, so that's a similarity to Jamaica that the rest of South America essentially doesn't have. And apparently they use the same type of port plugins, so that's an interesting fact there. So now it's time to look at worlddata.info for the country comparisons between Guyana and Jamaica. So let's get to it. Okay, so obviously the regions are different since Jamaica is a part of the Caribbean and Guyana is a part of South America. The government is kind of different, where Jamaica is a part of the parliamentary democracy under constitutional monarchy. Guyana is a parliamentary republic, so I don't know the main differences between those. That might be something I have to research more into detail about, but there is a slight difference, despite both of them being parliaments. So obviously there's a population difference where Guyana has 826 million people and Jamaica has 240 million people. And inhabitants per kilometer is much higher in Jamaica than Guyana. The life expectancy is a bit shorter in Guyana compared to Jamaica when you're looking at the men and the women, and the average age is definitely younger in Guyana in comparison, where the average age is 28.3 compared to Jamaica's 30.9. The birth rate is a lot higher, or the birth rate percentage is a lot higher in Guyana than Jamaica, which is interesting. And the death rate a bit higher as well in Guyana than Jamaica, though it's not much of a difference. And looking at the migration rate, it's definitely a bit worse in Guyana than Jamaica, but both are in the negatives. So when it comes to the quality of life, it seems like Jamaica is just higher in every metric. There's more political unrest in Guyana. The civil rights is worse in Guyana. The health is actually the same, with Jamaica being 1% lower. The climate a bit worse in Guyana than Jamaica. The cost of living, though, is much better in Guyana than Jamaica, which I find to be very interesting. And the popularity is obviously higher in Jamaica than Guyana. But looking at the numbers, neither one of them have very strong numbers in this regard. So looking at the economy, the unemployment rate higher in Guyana than Jamaica. The inflation rate is much higher in Jamaica, and I believe that's been the case in literally every single comparison I've done with Jamaica in this specific category. The cost of living is higher in Jamaica than Guyana. The commercial taxes is the same. The average income is higher in Guyana if we're going by the metric of US dollars. The government debt is higher in Jamaica, which has been consistent, and the corruption for both are bad, but it's a bit higher in Guyana. That is the data for the infrastructure, the roadways, just more in Jamaica. The railways is more in Guyana. That's pretty shocking, and the passenger airports is pretty much the same. Energy balance much higher in Jamaica, which we see in the production capacity, energy consumption, energy production, and the CO2 emissions are actually the same relatively, with Guyana being a bit higher, so that's interesting. Obviously, the, the telecommunications just higher in Jamaica in comparison by a lot, and I think Jamaica's been higher than every country that I've made. Jamaica's been higher than every single country that it's been compared to so far in this specific category. The healthcare system, there's more hospital beds in Guyana, and the physicians are higher. The HIV rate is much higher in Guyana than Jamaica, and I think this is the only country so far that has beaten Jamaica in this regard, so that's not good. The tuberous sclerosis is also higher, so is the diabetes is a bit higher, and there are more smokers as well. Daily temperature and the night temperatures for both countries is pretty much the same, though there's much more rain in Guyana than Jamaica. There's more forestry there, so that kind of makes sense. And the sunshine hours per day is higher in Jamaica than Guyana. The native languages both have an English Creole. I'm shocked Hindi isn't apparent here for Guyana. And then the religion, Christianity, Hinduism's higher here. Something tells me I forgot to do this for the others. I might add it in. Alrighty, so I am only going to do a top 5 with this video, and at 5th place is shockingly the Dominican Republic. And I'm shocked by this because there are so many differences from Jamaica and the Dominican Republic that instantly just stands out to me. But looking at the scores, it totals 67.5, so it only shares a similarity of 2/3 if you add in all the points and divide it by the median. So with its demographic, it's at 13.7, which I guess kind of makes sense because the Dominican Republic is seen as the country with the highest Afro population. But when you really look into the demographics of the Dominican Republic, most of the population are mixed mulattoes instead of black, where Jamaica is a heavily black population and the mulatto category is very small. So I think with this they went with Afro descent, but that's somewhat misleading based on how they identified it when I went into the site that I referenced. The culture is literally at a 10.2, so that's literally half. Not surprising because the Anglo Caribbean and the Hispanic Caribbean are very different when it comes to their culture, how they celebrate, and so many other elements. I'm not shocked that it's like this. The government being 11.5 is interesting to me. I'm wondering where that number came from, but I'm sure once I get further into it, I'll be able to understand a bit more. The infrastructure is 15.4. This isn't that surprising because I know with infrastructure, a lot of it is based on the geography. And looking at the geography, that's where the highest score between the two countries are with 16.8. And this makes sense because they are both Greater Antilles countries. So a lot of their land would be relatively similar. The temperature is kind of similar as well, and they're both very big touring areas. So I guess that isn't really shocking to me. So now we're in world data to look at the country comparison between Dominican Republic and Jamaica into further detail. So when it comes to the general information, of course, both are in the Caribbean. The Dominican Republic in kilometer or square kilometers is 48,000, where Jamaica is 10,990. So obviously, just from this, the Dominican Republic is roughly around 4 times larger than Jamaica. Not a surprise. So I guess with the government, here's the main difference, where the Dominican Republic has a presidential republic, interesting, and Jamaica has a parliamentary democracy under constitutional monarchy. So obviously the Commonwealth is probably the main difference between Jamaica and the Dominican Republic, but presidential republic, I have to do more research into figuring out what that is. Okay, so looking at the population, there's a huge difference here, where Jamaica is a bit less than 3 million, where the Dominican Republic is at over 11 million. This really isn't much of a surprise to me because I knew the Dominican Republic had a much larger population than Jamaica. So, when it comes to inhabitants per kilometer square or square kilometer, they are roughly the same, though Jamaica is a bit more. The life expectancy for men and women is a bit larger in the Dominican Republic compared to their Jamaican counterparts. The average age, ironically though, they're roughly the same, but it's at 29.2 for the Dominican Republic and 30.9 for Jamaica. The birth rate is a bit larger in the Dominican Republic at 18% compared to Jamaica's 11%, though the death rate in Jamaica is higher than the Dominican Republic, with Jamaica having an 8.79 to almost 9%, compared to the Dominican Republic's 6%. And then the migration rate is relatively the same between the both of them, though Jamaica's is a bit worse, I guess, or lower. So, when it comes to the quality of life, honestly, they're not much different. I think the quality of life is probably why, when it came to culture, the Dominican Republic and Jamaica were relatively high and similar. So when it comes to political stability, they're essentially the same, and it's the same with their civil rights, with the political stability being kind of high. Actually, no, yeah, political stability is relatively high, though the civil rights is roughly in the middle. When it comes to health, the Dominican Republic's much higher. Not much, but a decent amount higher than Jamaica, which is at 39%, where the Dominican Republic's at 53%. The climate's hotter in Jamaica than the Dominican Republic, which is shocking to me, to be honest. The cost of living is relatively the same, though a bit higher in the Dominican Republic, and the population, or the popularity, the popularity is relatively the same, which makes sense. So here's the information when it comes to the economy. The employment rate's a bit higher in the Dominican Republic. The inflation rate is higher in Jamaica, which has been a consistent thing with these videos, specifically with the inflation rate. The cost of living when it comes to the USA percentage, or whatever ratio that they use, is much higher in Jamaica than the Dominican Republic, with the Dominican Republic being at 41% compared to Jamaica's 61%. The average income is higher in the Dominican Republic by about 3 million. The central government debt is much higher in Jamaica than the Dominican Republic, and both of them have bad corruption index, though the Dominican Republic is a bit higher. Here's the data when it comes to the infrastructure. There's just more in Jamaica than the Dominican Republic in comparison. So make that of what you will. When it comes to the gross product and exported goods, the Dominican Republic's just a lot higher, so they make more money in this regard. So there it is. The energy balance is much higher in the Dominican Republic compared to Jamaica, and this makes sense because there's much more people in the Dominican Republic compared to Jamaica. The telecommunication rates are pretty. Okay, that's international dialing's the same. Again, with the DOM totals much higher in the Dominican Republic compared to Jamaica, which makes sense due to their much larger population. When it comes to their healthcare system, the HIV rate's a bit higher in Jamaica than the Dominican Republic. Uh, Diabetes is relatively the same, though Jamaica's a bit higher, same with the smokers. When it comes to hospital bed per 100 INH, they're relatively the same, though the physicians is much larger in the Dominican Republic compared to Jamaica. And then when it comes to climate here, here's where you see a lot of the similarities. The daytime temperatures are literally the same. The nighttime temperatures are relatively the same, though it's a bit warmer in Jamaica. No, it's a bit cooler in Jamaica in comparison. The water temperature is literally the same. The humidity is a bit higher in the Dominican Republic. The rain days are more in the Dominican Republic by double. And the sunshine hours per day is a bit higher in Jamaica, though relatively the same. And looking at the chart, you see how similar they are in this regard. Obviously, we're going to see a huge difference when it comes to the native languages, as it's 98% Spanish in the Dominican Republic. The English Creole is at 94% in Jamaica. French Creole is 2%. I'm assuming that this is due to Haitian migrants, maybe, or the little population of them that's there. Hindi being 1.9%, not surprising based on some of the Indo-Jamaicans that are there, and others at 3.9%. And then when it comes to religion, Dominican Republic's literally at 95%, and then 5% other. Jamaica has a good enough size of Christianity, but not nowhere near as much as the Dominican Republic. The non-denominationals at 21%, Rastafaris 1%, and other is 11.6%. Okay, so with me officially deciding to do a top 5 instead of a top 10, I am going to go over the honorable mentions in order, going from 6th to 10th. And at 6th, where the first honorable mention is Panama. This really isn't shocking because I know a lot of Jamaican people migrated to Panama, despite that being a Latin American country, so I know there's a lot of crossover there. At 7th is Haiti. Honestly, I thought this would have been on or in the top 5 over the Dominican Republic, since the people are similar with there being mostly black people, but I'm assuming maybe like the agricultural and the governmental differences bumped it down over the Dominican Republic, hence it being in the honorable mentions. At 8th is El Salvador. I don't know much commonalities there. And it's pretty much the same with Costa Rica, which is at 9th. I don't really get the commonalities there. And it's interesting that 3 of the honorable mentions are Central American countries. And at 10th is Suriname. I'm not that shocked with it being here, since it's very similar to Guyana, and that made it to the top 5, with those being non-Hispanic countries in South America, and with it having a lot of similarities to Guyana, I'm not shocked that it's on the top 10. But I went through the numbers of number 4 and number 5, and they really weren't that high. They're in like the 60 percentile, so with these 5, they obviously would have been that or lower, so I'm not shocked that that is what it is. Anyways, that's my list. I'm probably going to do this with a bunch of other countries just to see and compare and contrast within the Caribbean. And thank you all for watching. I'll be back with something else soon.